I was drying a casserole dish when my sister called to tell me our father was dead and that she had already spoken to his bank. My name is Callie Marsh. I was 34 years old that night. A hospice nurse at Sumner Regional. Standing in my apartment kitchen on a Tuesday in October holding a dish towel with a rooster on it that my grandmother had bought at a Piggly Wiggly in Hendersonville 30 years before. I remember the way the cotton went rough in my hands as I gripped it. "Daddy passed this morning," Deanna said. "Heart. They found him at the house around 6. I've already talked to First National. There's some paperwork but I'm handling it." I didn't say anything right away. "Callie," she said. "You there?" "I'm here," I told her. My father had been 61. He had not been sick, not that anyone had told me. "When did it happen?" I asked. "This morning. 6:15. Look, there's a lot to sort out. I'll be at the house tomorrow if you want to come by." I told her I would come by. I didn't ask about the accounts. I didn't ask what she meant by paperwork or why she had been the first call the bank made. I didn't raise my voice or ask her to slow down. I just said I would come by, thanked her for calling, and set the phone on the counter next to the casserole dish. I stood there for a long time. My father was Denton Ray Marsh, and the morning after my sister told me he was gone, I drove 40 minutes to the house where I had grown up on Greer's Ferry Road and learned that Deanna had already been inside for 4 hours. She had been through the desk. She met me at the door with a clipboard and a smile that I recognized from childhood as the one she used when she had already won something. "There's not much," she said, "but I've got it organized." She handed me an envelope before I was fully inside. A card envelope, the kind you buy at a drugstore. My name was written on the front in her handwriting. "That's your share," she said. "We're squared." I held the envelope. I didn't open it on the porch. I didn't argue. I walked inside, set my keys on the kitchen table, and sat down in the chair that had always been mine at that table, the one closest to the window, and I looked at my name written in blue ink on a white envelope. Inside was a bank card. Prepaid. The receipt tucked behind it said $1,000. $1,000. That was my share. Deanna was already in the hallway going through a box of documents, narrating to herself in a low voice, writing things on her clipboard. The house, the property, the 4.2 acres, the detached garage my father had built with his own hands over 3 summers. None of it, she would explain over the next hour, was mine. I set the card on the table. I kept my hands flat on the surface. I did not raise my voice. The thing about Deanna is that she had never been wrong about anything in her own mind. Not once to my knowledge in 32 years. She was 2 years older than me, and from the time we were children she had operated with a certainty that I could never quite locate in myself. About what things were worth, about who deserved what, about which of the two of us was more suited to inherit our grandfather's particular version of the world. Our grandfather was Ray Clyde Marsh. He had come to Hendersonville from Pulaski County with $40. A truck and a half-filled notebook of contacts he'd made working road construction through his 20s. He built a small freight brokerage out of a single room in a building on Main Street and ran it himself for 11 years before it was worth anything. By the time he handed it to my father, it had a small permanent staff, 3 contracts with regional suppliers, and a reputation in Sumner County for doing exactly what it said it would do. Papa was not a sentimental man. He was precise. He kept records of every dollar that had ever moved through his business, cross-referenced in 2 different ledgers, both of which I had seen as a child when he let me sit with him in the office on Saturday mornings while he balanced the week's accounts. He had a particular way of sitting at his desk, very still, very straight, both hands on the table, that I had watched so many times I had absorbed it without noticing. I found it in myself years later behind a nursing station at 2 in the morning, waiting for a family to arrive. Papa used to say, "The facts don't need your voice raised. They just need to be in the right room." He said it to me once when I was 11. Not to Deanna. To me. I was the one who asked him how he handled a customer who accused him of underpaying. He looked at me over the ledger and said it the way he said most things, flatly, without emphasis, as if he were stating something that had already been decided. I didn't understand it fully until I was 30. My father had inherited the business and run it decently for 20 years before a bad set of contracts and a slow economy ground it down. By the time I graduated high school, there was no business left to inherit. What remained was the house on Greer's Ferry Road and the 4.2 acres around it, which my grandfather had paid for outright and transferred to my father in a deed I had seen framed on the office wall as a child. Deanna graduated from Middle Tennessee State with a degree in marketing and a boyfriend who became a husband who became a problem. My father paid her tuition, $18,400 per year for years one summer session. He also co-signed her apartment lease twice and covered a $7,200 shortfall when her first marriage ended. I knew the numbers because I had been in the room when he told my mother quietly that he was not sure how much more he could manage. I did not go to MTSU. I applied for the James K. Polk Foundation Scholarship and received $3,100 per year. The rest I covered with shifts at a Cracker Barrel on Long Hollow Pike, Friday nights, Saturdays, early Sunday mornings before church traffic, and 2 summers of home health aide work that paid $11 an hour cash. I carried 18 credit hours one semester to finish faster. I did not ask my father for money. Not once. I did not want him to think he owed it to me. I graduated from Volunteer State with my nursing license and moved into a studio apartment in Hendersonville that cost $640 a month. I worked every shift the floor coordinator would give me. Nights, holidays, doublebacks. I was good at it. Not because I was the strongest clinically. There were nurses on that floor who had 40 years of experience. I would never match, but because I could sit in a room where someone was afraid and stay very calm. I could make the panic smaller just by not adding to it. That was the job. That was the whole job distilled. My first year as a hospice nurse, I had a patient named Mr. Grantham. 83 years old. Former electrician. He had a daughter who flew in from Phoenix and could not accept what the next 3 weeks were going to look like. She asked me the first night in a hallway outside his room what she was supposed to do. She was not asking clinically. She was asking the way people ask when they have run out of every answer they thought they had. I told her, sit with him. That's it. You don't have to do anything else. She looked at me like I had said something new. I walked back into the room and I kept my voice even and my hands steady and I did my job. That is what hospice nursing teaches you. It teaches you that most of the unbearable things in life become bearable if you stop performing your feelings about them and just keep moving. It teaches you that silence is not the absence of something. It is a thing you use. I was using it a lot in the years after my grandfather died. When Papa passed, 3 years before my father, he left a small amount of money in a savings account that had been divided equally among his grandchildren in a simple handwritten will. My portion was $4,300. I put $3,000 of it toward a down payment on a small condo in a complex off Indian Lake Boulevard. I paid $89,200 for it, financed through First National, $714 per month, which I covered without ever missing a payment. I did not tell my father. I did not tell Deanna. It was not a secret I was keeping. I simply had not found a reason to say it. Nobody asked about my finances. Nobody thought to. What I did not know for the first 3 years was that my father had a separate account at First National that he had opened in both our names, his and mine, after my grandfather died. He had never mentioned it. He had put money in it irregularly when he had extra. $200 here for $100 there, once $1,100 after a good quarter doing contract hauls for a gravel operation in Gallatin. The account had grown slowly over 12 years to $38,400. I did not know this account existed. Deanna did not know it existed either. The difference was that I was named on it. She was not. My father, as far as I ever understood it, had done this without telling anyone. Maybe he thought he would mention it eventually. Maybe he thought it would sort itself out. Maybe he just believed in the way that people believe things they have decided but never said aloud that I knew. I didn't know. But on a Tuesday morning in March, 7 years after Deanna handed me that prepaid card on the porch of our father's house and told me we were squared, I found out. That is not where I'm starting though. The bank comes later. What happened between the porch and the bank is the part that most people don't see. The part that looks from the outside like nothing. I used the $1,000 card once. I bought groceries. $47.83 at a Kroger in Hendersonville. Then I put the card in an envelope in the back of my sock drawer and I did not touch it again. I kept going to work. I kept paying my mortgage. I kept sitting in rooms with people who were dying and helping their families understand what was coming. I sent my father a card on his birthday and visited him at the house 3 or 4 times a year and never brought up Deanna or the settlement or the clipboard or the word squared. If he felt any discomfort about what had happened, he didn't show it. He He was not a man who revisited things. I didn't bring it up with Deanna either. She called occasionally, holidays once when she needed someone to watch her dog, and I answered and I was civil and I kept my voice where it belonged. Invisible family support is a particular kind of labor. In the year after my father's settlement with Deanna, when he was adjusting to living alone and his truck needed a transmission, I paid for it. $2,140 cash, which I told the mechanic to bill to me and told my father was covered by a discount through the garage's employer plan. There was no employer plan. I just paid it. I did not want him to feel the debt. I did not tell Deanna. The following spring his water heater failed. I paid half, $680, and told him the plumber had given him a senior rate. I did this not because I expected anything back. I did it because he was my father and it was what needed doing and I had the money and he didn't. That was the whole math of it. That was the history. This is what happened on a Wednesday afternoon in February, 7 years after my father's funeral. I was at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold beside me when my phone rang. It was a woman named Sandra Prewitt who said she was a customer service coordinator at First National Bank of Hendersonville. She had a careful voice, the kind of voice that has been trained to deliver information without inflection. She said she was calling because there was an account at the branch associated with my social security number, and that the account had gone into an unclaimed property review cycle, and that before it transferred to the state she wanted to reach me directly. An account, I said. Yes, ma'am. A joint savings account, originally opened in 2004. The primary account holder passed away in October, I said. 2017. Yes, ma'am. We've been attempting contact through the address on file, but it appears that address is no longer current. I told her my current address. She said someone would be in touch within 5 business days with documentation. I didn't tell her I had no idea the account existed. Kept my voice even. I wrote down her name and the branch extension and I thanked her and I ended the call and I sat very still at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called Deanna. I didn't plan to. I just did. Hey, she said. She sounded busy. He was always busy. Did Daddy have any accounts that weren't in the estate? I said. Pause. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. What? Savings accounts. Anything at First National that wasn't in the paperwork you handled. Callie, what are you talking about? That was 7 years ago. I know. Everything went through the estate. I handled all of it. You signed off. I had signed off on the estate summary she prepared. I had not, I was now understanding, known what I was signing off on. I had assumed the document was complete because she had told me it was complete. I had not had a lawyer look at it. I had not asked for a full accounting from the bank. I had just signed. I didn't argue with her on the phone. I let her tell me she had handled everything correctly. I let her get to the end of it. Hey, I said. I was just curious. I hung up. Then I called an attorney. His name was Gerald Alderman. He had an office on Main Street in Hendersonville, 2 blocks from the courthouse. I had found his name through a colleague at Sumner Regional whose mother had used him in an estate dispute 3 years earlier. She had said, "He's slow and he's careful and he doesn't miss things." I drove to his office on a Thursday morning. It smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper, the particular smell of a room where serious things get organized slowly. He had 2 yellow legal pads on his desk and a framed photo of the Smoky Mountains behind him. He was in his 60s, heavy set, with reading glasses he took off and held while he listened. I told him everything. The porch. The card. The 7 years. The phone call from Sandra Prewitt. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he put his glasses back on and opened a drawer. "You said First National," he said. "Yes." He pulled out a single sheet, a form I didn't recognize, and set it on the desk between us. "If you're named on that account," he said, "it doesn't go through the estate. It never did. It would have passed to you directly at the time of death. It was yours from the moment he died." I kept my hands on my lap. "And if it went through the estate anyway?" I asked. He looked at me over his glasses. "Then it went somewhere it legally could not have gone." He told me what he would need. Account documentation from the bank. A copy of the original estate summary Deanna had filed. My social security records matching the account. He said it would take a few weeks to pull together, but that if what I was describing was accurate, the picture was fairly clear. If you have ever been in a room where someone confirms quietly and without drama, That you were right about something you had never quite let yourself believe. You know what that afternoon felt like. You know the particular stillness of it. Not triumph. Not anger. Something smaller and more precise than either of those things. I drove home. Over the following 3 weeks I did what Gerald Alderman asked. I requested my account records from First National directly. I pulled the estate summary from a folder I had kept in my filing cabinet since 2017, not because I had suspected anything but because I kept paperwork. That was a hospice nurse habit. You keep the paperwork. You never know when the paperwork matters. I requested a certified copy of the account authorization letter, the original joint account agreement with my name on it, from the bank's records department. It came in a plain white envelope 8 days later. My name was on it in black type. Dated August 14, 2004. If you've ever been told your share is an envelope, if you've ever been handed a number and told to consider it settled, this is what I want you to know. The settlement was not the truth. The settlement was just what someone said. The paperwork is the truth. The paperwork has always been the truth. I put the letter in a manila envelope. I put the manila envelope in the inside pocket of my work bag, where I kept things I needed to access quickly. Right next to my nursing badge. I told Gerald Alderman I had everything he had asked for. He told me he'd reviewed the estate filing and that the joint account had not been listed. Not listed and not disclosed. He said there were a few ways this could be handled and that the simplest would be to request a meeting at the bank with a branch manager and a notary with documentation, and to allow the bank's records to speak for themselves. I asked him, could Deanna be there? He paused. That's up to you, he said. I want her there, I said. I did not say why. He did not ask. If you have ever been the quiet one in a family, the one who didn't argue, didn't push back, didn't keep a running tab, and you have ever wondered whether the quiet was costing you something, it was. It was costing you. And the document that proves it has been sitting in a drawer somewhere this whole time. Gerald Alderman called Deanna's attorney of record from the estate filing. That attorney informed Deanna that there was a discrepancy in the estate accounting and that a meeting had been requested at First National Bank on a Tuesday morning in March to review the documentation. Deanna called me that night. What is going on? She said. Her voice was different from our usual phone calls. Tighter. There's a meeting at the bank, I said. Tuesday morning. Gerald Alderman is handling it. Who is Gerald Alderman? My attorney. Boss. Callie. Tuesday morning, I said. 9 o'clock. Kept my voice even. I ended the call. I set the phone face down on the counter. I spent the next several days doing what I had always done. I went to work. I drove Indian Lake Boulevard in the mornings. I sat beside people in the final hours of their lives and I kept my hands steady and my voice where it belonged. There is something clarifying about that kind of work. It has a way of arranging everything into the right order. The things that matter and the things that don't and the things that have always been true regardless of whether anyone said them out loud. I had been carrying this particular truth for 7 years. I was ready to put it on a table. That night, the night before the meeting, my mother's sister called. Aunt Peg, who was 71 and lived in Gallatin and had not spoken to Deanna in 4 years over a different matter entirely. She called at 9:30 and I almost didn't answer because I was already in bed. But I picked up. I heard you've got something happening tomorrow, she said. She had the same flat directness my grandfather had, delivered in a softer voice. I do, I said. Are you nervous? No, I said. And I meant it. I had passed the nervous part weeks ago, somewhere in the attorney's office on Main Street with carpet cleaner and old paper and a man who put his glasses back on and said, "It was yours from the moment he died." Aunt Peg was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather used to say you were the one who paid attention." I didn't answer. "He told me once," she said, "that Deanna talks and Callie watches. And that the one who watches always knows more." I let that sit. "He said that?" I asked. "At your high school graduation," she said. "He was very proud of you. He just didn't say things out loud very much." "No," I said. "He didn't." "You go tomorrow," she said. "You take your folder. You let them do their job." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Your grandfather built everything he had by putting the right paper in the right room," she said. "You're his." I thanked her. I told her I would call after. I turned the light off and lay in the dark and thought about a man sitting at a desk on Saturday mornings with 2 ledgers open, teaching me without meaning to everything I needed to know. The facts don't need your voice raised. They just need to be in the right room. I got up at 5:15. Not because I needed to. The meeting wasn't until 9. But I had been awake since 4 and there was no point in lying there counting the ceiling tiles. So I got up and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the dark come apart over the tree line. I showered. I put on the gray wool blazer I kept for court dates and family holidays, the one with the pocket on the inside left where I had learned to keep things that needed to stay flat. I had dry cleaned it the week before. I pressed my slacks. I wore the good boots not because anyone would notice, but because I had decided that everything about that morning was going to be deliberate. Every single piece of it. The manila envelope went into my work bag in the main compartment face up. Gerald Alderman had advised me to have the documents in order before I arrived. I had been in order for 11 days. I checked the bag twice. Once at 6, once at 7:45. I drove out at 8:15. The drive to First National takes 22 minutes when the lights are cooperative. I took Indian Lake Boulevard all the way down, the same road I had driven to pay my mortgage for 9 years. The same road I had driven the morning after my father's funeral when I was trying to understand what had just happened. The radio came on and I turned it off. I did not need sound. The morning was gray and very cold, and when I pulled into the parking lot at 8:52 and stepped out, the air smelled like rain that had not arrived yet, like concrete and dead leaves and something faint from the diner 2 blocks over. I stood in the parking lot for 15 seconds. Then I went in. The branch lobby of First National in Hendersonville is not a large room. 6 teller windows along one wall, a cluster of desks in the back, a waiting area with 4 chairs and a low table with brochures on it that nobody ever read. Gerald Alderman was already there, standing near the back wall with his briefcase, speaking quietly to a woman in a navy blazer I did not recognize. He raised his hand when he saw me. Deanna was already seated at the long table in the conference room they had opened up off the main floor. I could see her through the glass partition. She was in a cream blouse and she was holding her phone with both hands and typing quickly. She had brought her own attorney, a man I didn't know, heavy-set, with a yellow legal pad already open in front of him. There was also a branch manager named Keith Pulliam, who Gerald had arranged to be present, and a notary named Ms. Gale who sat at the far end of the table with a stamping kit and the expression of someone who had seen this kind of meeting before and had strong opinions about it that she would not be sharing today. I walked in and sat down across from Deanna. She looked up from her phone. I did not smile. I did not look away. I just sat down and folded my hands on the table and waited. She set her phone face down. I had been in the hospice unit long enough to understand the grammar of a room before anything is said. You learn it fast in that work. The way people arrange themselves around a bed when they have agreed without speaking that today is the day. The way silence has a texture to it when everyone in the room knows something that nobody has said out loud yet. This room had that texture. Deanna's attorney leaned over and said something to her in a low voice. She nodded once quickly and straightened in her chair. Her posture was the one I recognized from childhood. Very upright, very certain, the posture of a person who has reviewed the situation and concluded that they are in control of it. Gerald Alderman sat down beside me. He opened his briefcase and set 2 documents on the table in front of him. He did not offer them to anyone. He just set them there, aligned parallel to the table edge. Keith Pulliam cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming in," he said. "We're here today to review the account documentation related to account number ending in 4417, which was opened as a joint savings account in August of 2004 and remained open at the time of Mr. Denton Marsh's passing in October of 2017. He paused. "We were able to confirm," he said, "that the secondary account holder on record, Ms. Callie Marsh, was not included in the estate inventory filed in November of 2017. Deanna's attorney wrote something on his legal pad. Deanna looked at me. I looked back. I didn't say anything. I let Keith Pulliam keep going. Deanna's attorney asked to pause the meeting. He conferred with her in a low voice for about 45 seconds. I watched the window. The rain had started, a thin gray drizzle against the glass, the kind that barely made a sound. Gerald Alderman sat perfectly still beside me with his hands on the table. When Deanna's attorney sat back, Deanna turned to face Keith Pulliam directly. "My father had several accounts," she said. "When he passed we went through everything. There was a complete estate filing. If something was missed, it was an administrative oversight. Keith Pulliam nodded without expression. Gerald Alderman said, "The account wasn't missed in the filing. It wasn't listed." "That may be a clerical error," Deanna's attorney said. "The account had a named secondary holder," Gerald said. "It did not require estate action. It transferred by operation of law at the moment of Mr. Marsh's death. There was nothing to list." Deanna looked at me. "Callie, you're not seriously saying—" I didn't say anything yet. I waited. "You signed the estate summary," she said. "You agreed everything was accounted for." Kept my face still. "Callie, we settled this. Years ago. You know we settled this." Her voice had a careful note in it now. Not quite pleading, not quite accusatory, something hovering between the two that I recognized as the voice she used when she was recalculating. I let her finish. I let the silence after her last sentence stretch out long enough that everyone in the room could feel its weight. Then I set my hands flat on the table. I stood up slowly. I looked at my sister across that conference table in the fluorescent light of a bank conference room on a Tuesday morning in March. "You handed me an envelope," I said. "You told me that was my share. You said we were squared." I paused. "You were right about one thing," I said. "We weren't squared. We just hadn't finished counting yet." I reached into my bag. I took out the manila envelope. I unfolded the clasp slowly, drew out the single-page authorization letter, and held it with both hands for a moment. The paper made a small sound against my palms. Then I laid it flat on the table in front of Keith Pulliam. It landed with the account number visible at the top, my name in the second line in black ink. Secondary account holder, Callie Renee Marsh. Keith Pulliam looked at it. He turned it slightly toward Ms. Gale, the notary. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she opened her stamping kit. I said, 84 mortgage payments. 9 property tax receipts. 7 years. I had not planned to say that. It came out the way things do when they have been sitting somewhere for a long time. Deanna's attorney put his pen down. Deanna looked at the document. She looked at it for a long time. Her hands, which had been flat on the table, moved to her lap. I watched her jaw tighten. I watched the color at her throat change. Not dramatically, just a shade, the particular shift that happens when a body understands something before the mind has agreed to. "That account," she started, "is documented," Gerald Alderman said. "The original authorization. The balance history. The secondary holder designation. All of it." She looked at Gerald. She looked at Keith Pulliam. He did not look at me. Her attorney reached over and put a hand on her forearm. A small, deliberate gesture, the kind that means, "Stop talking." She stopped talking. The room was very quiet. The thin rain against the glass. The sound of Ms. Gale's stamp. Across the table, Deanna's attorney lifted his legal pad and set it down at a slightly different angle for no particular reason. He did not write anything. Keith Pulliam cleared his throat again and began explaining the transfer process. He used words like remediation and original designation and account status. He had a careful, procedural voice, and he directed most of it at Gerald Alderman, which told me everything I needed to know about where the bank understood this conversation to be going. I sat back down. I folded my hands. I did not look at Deanna. Deanna's attorney asked a few procedural questions. Gerald answered them. Keith Pulliam confirmed 3 things in sequence. Ms. Gale stamped a second document and set it on the table. It was quiet and orderly and completely devastating, the way the most consequential things often are. At some point Deanna said very quietly, "I didn't know about that account." I looked at her then. Just for a moment. I didn't answer. I let that sit exactly where it landed. After about 20 minutes, Keith Pulliam indicated that the documentation was sufficient and that the bank would be initiating the transfer of the account balance to me within 5 to 7 business days. He thanked everyone for coming in. He stood up and shook Gerald's hand and then mine. Deanna did not stand up immediately. She sat in her chair with both hands in her lap, looking at the table. Her attorney was packing his legal pad into his bag. The notary was closing her kit. Gerald was organizing his documents. I picked up the manila envelope. I slit the authorization letter back inside. I set the envelope in my bag. I looked at Deanna. "I kept the card," I said. "The prepaid card. I still have it." She looked up. "I used $47.83 of it," I said. "Groceries." March 7 years ago. The rest I never spent. I picked up my bag. I put on my coat. You were right that we weren't really settled, I said. I just didn't know the right paperwork yet. I walked out of that conference room. Before I left the conference room, I had sat in that chair for a full 3 minutes after Keith Pulliam's closing words. Deanna sat across from me and did not speak. Her attorney finished packing his bag, stood, nodded at Gerald and left the room. Deanna did not move. Her hands were still in her lap. She was looking at the space on the table where the authorization letter had been, that small rectangle of emptiness where the paper had rested. I watched her face. I had spent 34 years watching my sister's face the way you watch weather. I knew her certainty face and her dismissal face and her performance face. The one she wore at family dinners when she was telling a story that required other people to understand she had been right. This was none of those. This was a face I had not seen before. It was very still. Very careful. Like something behind it was working through a sequence of calculations and arriving, one by one, at answers it did not want. Her jaw was tight. Her hands, when she finally moved them back to the table, were not quite steady. She looked at me. I genuinely didn't know, she said. I let that sit. The rain ticked against the window. I know, I said. And I meant it. I believed her. It did not change what had happened. It did not change what the paperwork said. It did not change the card with the rooster dish towel and the clipboard and were squared. But I believed she had not known about that account. She nodded once. She looked down. Miss Gale, who had been organizing her kit at the far end of the table, stood and excused herself quietly. She did not look at either of us. She closed the door behind her. Deanna and I sat in that room alone for about 30 seconds. It was the first time we had been in a room alone since the morning after our father's funeral. She said, "Are you going to say anything else?" "No," I said. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I walked out. I walked through the lobby past the teller windows and the low table with the unread brochures, and I pushed through the front door and stood on the sidewalk in the thin gray drizzle. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt the way I felt after a long shift that had gone the way it was supposed to go, tired and steady and finished. Gerald came out 2 minutes later. He stood beside me on the sidewalk and said, "That went well." "Yes," I said. 5 to 7 business days, he said. "I heard," I said. He shook my hand and walked to his car. I think about what Gerald Alderman said on the sidewalk sometimes. That went well. 4 words, very flat, delivered in the tone of a man who has seen things go poorly and knows the difference. He had not been surprised by any of it. He had told me in his office on Main Street with the carpet cleaner smell and the Smoky Mountains behind him, that if what I was describing was accurate, the picture was fairly clear. He had been right. What he could not have told me, what I did not know until I was standing on that sidewalk in the drizzle watching him walk to his car, was how much smaller the whole thing would feel once it was finished. Not the money. Not the document. The act of it. 7 years of a closed envelope in a sock drawer and 1 hour in a conference room, and then it was done and I was driving back to work on Indian Lake Boulevard with the radio still off. I stopped at a red light on Drakes Creek Road. The light was long. I sat there with both hands on the wheel and watched a woman in a green coat walk a dog on the sidewalk across the street. The dog stopped to investigate something invisible in the grass. The woman waited. She didn't pull the leash. She just stood there in her green coat in the thin rain and let the dog take its time. The light changed. I drove on. 3 months after that Tuesday, Deanna had not called. I was not waiting for her to. I was working my shifts. I was driving Indian Lake Boulevard in the mornings. I was paying my mortgage, which would be paid off in 6 years, and which I had always paid alone. The account. My father's account, the one with my name on it, settled at $41,200 after the transfer fees. I put $30,000 toward an additional payment on my property and left the rest in savings. I did not buy anything to celebrate. I did not need to. He said that was my share. I thought about that word, share, every time I sat down at a patient's bedside and made sure they understood what was theirs and what was coming. Every time I helped a family understand what their person had built and what it was worth. He said we were squared. I thought about that every November when I wrote the check for my property taxes and put it in the envelope and drove it to the courthouse on Greer's Ferry Road. Every single year. Without saying a word to anyone. He said family takes care of family. I thought about that when I paid for the truck transmission. When I covered the water heater. When I answered your phone calls on holidays and was civil and kept my voice where it belonged. The papers were filed. The balance was transferred. That was enough. The people who price you cheap are only ever telling you what they're worth, not what you are. If you've ever been the one who signed things without asking questions, who kept quiet because it seemed easier, who let someone hand you an envelope and called it settled, let this be the sign that the facts have always been in the right room. You just needed the right moment to put them on the table. I still have the card. The prepaid card with $1,000 on it that Deanna pressed into an envelope and handed me on the porch of our father's house in October 2017. There is $952.17 left on it. I know the exact number because I checked it once, 2 weeks after the bank meeting, just to confirm. I have not decided what to do with it. Maybe I'll spend it on something ordinary. Groceries again, or a new pair of boots. Maybe I'll let it sit in the sock drawer until the balance expires. It doesn't matter much either way. What I know is this. My grandfather built everything he had by putting the right paper in the right room. He taught me that sitting at a desk on Saturday mornings while he balanced 2 ledgers and I sat across from him pretending to understand. I understood it eventually. The quiet ones always do. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs it.